BLV is not like PFAS. It doesn't have to last forever. And once you accept that BLV is detrimental to the health of cows, and Tasia explained that it compromises the immune system, that cows are not protected as well from the vaccines, that they're more susceptible to other diseases. Once you accept that it's costly to the farm, and Tasia showed you some cost figures, cost per cow on a farm, and once you accept the fact that it's damaging to the reputation of dairy farming, she didn't mention that, but I will mention that is that we have cows that are chronically infected and we tolerate that. And frankly, that's a hard thing for consumers to understand that why do we tolerate chronic infection of cows? And frankly, they have a right to question that. And then the last point is that once you know that it's preventable, the next question should be, how do I get rid of it? And that's been my focus as an extension educator. I'm on the side of, okay, we've got it, let's get rid of it. How's the best way to do that? Next slide, please. So early on, in 2015 and 16, I was working with recruiting herds for a longer term project to see how they could reduce the prevalence of BLV in their herds. Okay, so recruited 91 herds in the 2 years for a 3-year project, and we started them off with a herd profile test. Now, a herd profile test is an ELISA test of 40 cows in the herd. It's the 10 freshest cows of first lactation, the 10 freshest of second lactation, the 10 freshest of third lactation, and the 10 freshest fourth and later lactations. And so it's 40 cows, and from that, we estimate the herd prevalence. Now, you may say, 40 cows, how does 40 cows estimate the prevalence of a 500 cow herd or of a 1,000 cow herd or of a 5,000 cow herd? Okay. And the reality is that it's pretty good at estimating the prevalence of those, no matter what the herd size is. But it gives us an idea of what the prevalence is within a herd. And back in those days, 2015, 16, it was the test that we had. We didn't have PCR yet. And so all we had was ELISA. And so we identified with these herds risks for BLV transmission. And Tasia told you that the risk of transmission are with blood cells, white blood cells. And so when we transfer white blood cells, either by transferring blood or by transferring white blood cells through milk or colostrum, we have a risk of infecting the other animal, right? And we identified the risks on these 91 herds of BLV transmission and encouraged farmers to reduce those risks by changing practices. Most commonly, to not share needles and sleeves. And so just to let you know, it can be microscopic blood on needles that we take from one animal and give to the next animal. It can be microscopic blood on a sleeve that is used to examine one animal, and we put that arm into the next animal, and we can transfer blood that way. And so those are ways that we can transfer blood, as well as from feeding colostrum or milk feeding, especially when we pool milk and feed it to a group of calves. If we pool milk from 10 cows, and 2 of them are BLV infected and shedding, we can infect the group of calves that we give that milk to. Right? And so then we talked with producers about those risk things. We let them make their own decisions. And then we did annual herd profile tests to see what happened with prevalence. Over 3 years, some herds decreased prevalence significantly. That was great. But others did not. And still others actually increased in prevalence. That was frustrating, not just to me, it was frustrating to the farmers who say, well, I'm doing these things, and why is my prevalence going up? But we didn't have any other tools with which to investigate this. Next slide. So PCR changed the field for us. Wow, what a great thing that would happen when we had PCR available, that we could actually now measure quantitatively. That's the Q in front of PCR. Quantitatively, we can measure how much DNA there was, how much provirus there was in each of these animals. And so it gives us the ability to identify not just the positive cows, but the cows that are the greatest risk to spread the virus. So I can take a bunch of positive cows and say, these are the priority because they're the greatest risk. And so using that information in conjunction with risk reducing practices, we can plan a program that's targeted to the herd. We can call individuals that are not only the worst threat to their herd mates, but also the ones that are likely to have the greatest economic impact on their own health, because we know that the higher the proviral load, the greater the economic impact on those animals from themselves. It also identifies the ELISA positive animals that we can ignore, right? Because frankly, when we can't detect the BLV DNA in an ELISA positive animal, we know that she's got antibodies to it, but we can't find the virus, then I'm not worried about that animal. I can ignore that animal's fact that she's positive, and I can concentrate on the ones that I have high BLV proviral load. Next slide. In 2021, we we started a new project. It was a one-year grant, and it was called Moving to Zero. And what we wanted to do was to take herds from our 2015 to 16 projects, and those lasted 3 years, so they were ending in 18 and 19, and take herds that were low in prevalence or had zero prevalence at that time, because we didn't know what happened between the last test and 2021. And so we identified 10 herds that had lower to zero prevalence, and we did a whole herd ELISA test to identify positive and suspect cows. And then with the positive and suspect cows, we did a PCR test on those cows. And that would be our typical route of action, is to identify the cows that are positive on ELISA, and then to do a PCR on those positive animals to find out whether they're high, moderate, low, or undetected. And so using that information, producers could target calling to the cows with the highest proviral load. And so we gave the producers the information. We didn't tell them what they had to do with it. Frankly, we allowed them to do whatever they wanted to do with it. And then just we followed up with them to see what happened. Okay, next slide. Well, the results were that 4 herds had zero BLV cows. So no cows positive on the ELISA test. And that was good news, because that means that we had tracked them over a period of 6 or 7 years, and they had been BLV negative that whole time. You know, when we say that 94% of herds are infected, you might say, well, it's a given that every herd will be infected at some point in time. That may not be true. And of these negative herds, some of them were a couple hundred cows in size, but even so, they had not bought cattle in. And so that was the critical difference in that case. So 4 herds maintained that negative status. 1 herd during the project bought cows. They were doing really well in reducing BLV prevalence in the herd, and then they bought cows, and wow, they found out that those cows were infected. The other 5 herds reduced prevalence by reducing risk transmission and by calling the high shedders. Now, during this 1 year period, no herd eliminated all the BLV positive animals, right? And we recognize that the decision to call an animal based on a test result is a little shaky ground for some producers who say, that animal is a great producer. Why would I call her? Well, she's also shedding virus. And so, producers have that struggle of calling animals versus the milk production that they're giving. So it takes time to reduce this. And also, as a part of that study, we calibrated a test that could accurately distinguish bulk tank milk from negative herds to those with very low prevalence. We knew we could always find high prevalence herds by bulk tank testing, but we didn't know how low we could go in prevalence. We found that we could have 1 or 2 out of 50 cows and still be able to detect that in the bulk tank. Next slide. So what does it take to be effective in controlling BLV, to be effective in getting rid of this disease? Well, Dr. Don Niles was at the BLV conference, and Tasia mentioned the All Things BLV conference coming up in July this year. He was at the conference 2 years ago, I believe it was, at Michigan State, and he said this. He said, any significant animal care changes have started out with an innovative veterinarian and an innovative client working together to create a change that makes sense to them. I thought, wow, okay, let's see what we can do with that. And so we wanted to, and Tasia and I talked about this, we wanted to start a nationwide project that would create teams in the top dairy states, teams that would consist of a producer, their veterinarian, and their extension professional working together to reduce BLV in that producer's herd. And we wanted to have these teams in each of these states so that it would give it would give a knowledge of BLV reduction in these states because, frankly, we don't believe that's very widespread. And so I contacted extension agents in several states about supporting the project. And Erica was one of those. And I contacted Erica, and she was glad to participate in that project. But we failed to get the proposal put together. And I'll take the blame on that. And so we just didn't get it done. However, Erica was persistent. And she kept asking about it because she had a herd that was interested in it. Next slide. Well, Erica's persistence won me over. All right. And so I got a grant, a Michigan grant, to work with a Wisconsin herd. I don't know how that one got through, but indeed it did. And so one herd, their veterinarian and their extension educator, which is Erica. And so I visited the farm in January 2024 along with the vet and Erica. And we sat down together and we talked about the herd management. We talked about BLV. We talked about what we know about BLV control and eradication. And, I said, here's the grant. And this is how much I have to spend for testing. You can determine how you want to spend it for testing. That's your determination. I just tell you what the limit is. And so we talked with them about that. And then we set up Zoom calls every other month to check on progress, to ask questions, to talk about actions, and to ask everybody to participate in those calls. That is all three of the partners, because we want this team, the team of the producer, the veterinarian, and the extension agent, to be a focal point of getting that information out broader and to be successful working together. Next slide. And so this is a high producing herd of more than 500 cows. Their initial herd profile test showed 53% prevalence, with a big increase in prevalence from first lactation to second lactation, from 10% to 70%. All right, now that, again, a herd profile test is a test of 40 cows, right? 10 cows of each of the lactations. And the producers said, yeah, well, that's 40 cows. I don't really think that that is going to estimate the BLV prevalence in my herd. So they elected to do a whole herd ELISA test. It turns out that the positive animals plus the suspect animals equaled 53% of the herd. I guess it just shows, but frankly, I don't think it's always going to be that close. But I was really glad that it was exactly the same prevalence that the herd profile test showed. I don't expect it to be that close all the time. I expect it just to give us a good idea of what the prevalence is in the herd when we do a herd profile test. But anyway, their goals were to keep negative cows negative. That means reduce transmission. And reducing transmission involves practice changes and it involves what we do with animals. And so the second goal was to reduce the number of positive animals who are the greatest risk to negative cattle. All right. So those are their goals going into this. Next slide. They took some actions. They said, we will do these things. And we will do these things in order to reduce the risk of transmission. And so they said, we'll do single needle use. We'll stop using needles for multiple animals. And not only did they stop it at the farm that they operate, the mature cow farm, but they also asked their heifer grower to use single-use needles there as well. They said they would breed any positive cow to beef. They're saying we don't want the offspring of a positive cow because the potential, and Tasia mentioned, the fact that the offspring, the calves of positive dams were 3.2 times more likely to become positive at a later time than those from negative animals. So they didn't want offspring from positive cows on the farm. They also elected to test heifers as they freshened, and that was something that they wanted to do just to see how heifers were coming in. And they said, we'll clean and disinfect the maternity pen after every 4 to 5 calves. Now, somebody may say, well, Phil, wouldn't it be better to clean and disinfect the maternity pen after every calf or after every positive dam gives birth? And I would say, sure, but the reality is, whatever the program is, it has to be practical because if it's not practical, it will not be kept up. And so if you start something that's too aggressive, that's too impractical, and don't keep it up, that's worse than not starting that at all at that level. I would always say start at some level, and then you can always increase the level later. So if today they're cleaning it after every 4 to 5 calves, maybe at some point they'll clean it more frequently than that. I don't know. But at this point, I say, great, I'll take what you're willing to give. Next slide. So follow through. Did they follow through? And the answer is absolutely. All parties were on each call. We had, I think, five or six calls meeting every other month. Um, there was they did regular testing of fresh heifers. They were consistent in breeding every positive cow to beef, no matter what the genetic value of that cow is. And that's a major deal because, some of those cows have got a high genetic value, and yet they're breeding positive cows to beef. Positive cows were identified. There was good compliance on the single-use needles at the heifer growers as well at the home farm. And they found another source of needles and syringes so that they could buy them cheaper so the cost did not go up much. They also were always using new sleeves for breeding. Overall, but they don't use new sleeves. I don't believe the veterinarian uses new sleeves for every animal. All right, that's one of those compromises. But again, compromise is where you can find the practical road even if the risk may be a little higher. And overall, labor was not changed much, and so that was good news. But they were willing to spend more time in labor if it would result in lower risk. But overall, labor was unchanged. Next slide. So follow-up testing in September of 24, they tested the whole herd, and it was at 23% prevalence. That was down significantly for 53% prevalence in February. And of 62 head or ELISA positive animals were tested, there was zero that were high. Now, high is the ones that we want to get rid of because they're the greatest shedders. Only six were moderate, 34 were low, and 21 were undetected. 21 I could ignore. I can live with the 34 that are low, and if we had had high ones, I might even say I can live with the moderate ones and get by with them. But now I look at six moderate ones and think, wow, what I want to do with six moderate ones is I want to get rid of them because I want to reduce my risk even more. So they made tremendous progress in a short period of time. And I think that's key to remember is that they were able to make a lot of progress. They're not down to zero, and they understand that getting to zero is a long-term process. Next slide. Uh, keep going. What happened there? Go back and see what happens and see if we can get, well, apparently those things didn't show up. So
Oh no, sorry.
that's all right. Let me just tell you what's on the slide. Try to remember what's on the slide. So, first of all, every farm is different. Don't expect that somebody else's results will be what results you might achieve, because every farm, every farmer, everybody's cows, everybody's resources, everyone's situation is different. In fact, that cow down there is a butter cow at the Iowa State Fair. That's certainly a different cow. I don't think it was BLV infected. So that's a different cow. And every farm is different. But what you can expect is that we believe that no matter what the situation is, that with conscientious progress, every farm can make progress. It may take longer for some to get to zero than others. It may not be the goal to get to zero, but truly, we believe that each farm has the capability to make progress on this disease. But it takes individual consultation in order to get that. Go ahead, next slide. Now, we did evaluations of the project, and participants increased their understanding of BLV in all six areas measured. They understood the prevalence better. They understood the transmission better. They understood the risk factors, the testing, the use of test results, and the management better. And they reported that working together as a team, and this is what we wanted to do, bring them together as a team, was beneficial because it ensured accountability. It helped to have another person to talk to about BLV. It provided a more comprehensive approach. It improved understanding as others asked questions. And the project meetings that we had, the first one being in person, the next one's being virtual, were valuable because they provided an opportunity to solve problems together, to keep the project on track, and helped in planning a path forward. Next slide. The keys to success, and I think these are critical. The first one is the producer attitude. If you want to succeed in this, you will. If you're iffy, if you're on the fence on this, I don't expect great results. In this case, that farm that we worked with, they had a goal. Their goal was eradication. They said, we look at it like Johne's disease, we want to eradicate it. And they're willing to do what it took to eradicate it. Now, they're not there yet, and they recognize that it's a long-term process. But what they said was that if if we believe that it's one less stress on the cow, and that is positive in the long run. And if we can reduce the number of cows that are not saleable at the packing house, that's a financial win, especially at today's beef prices. They also had great reproduction success. And so that reproductive success that they have enabled them to be able to call cows or breed cows to beef. They had a willing veterinarian who provided encouragement and worked with them. They had an active extension educator who took and sent the notes after each meeting to remind them of what was discussed and decided on. And they had patience and persistence. It's a long-term project. Next slide, please. So, my recommendations, start the herd profile test to find out where you stand. Talk with your veterinarian, your extension professional about developing a plan to control it. Set your goals. Make sure that you have an accountability partner. This takes a long time. If you're going to do this, you've got to be held to your goals and stick with it. Be willing to invest in testing. I think you should set an annual budget for testing. Develop a plan for cows at each possible test result. Figure out what you're going to do ahead of time before you get the results back. That way, it's easier to make those decisions. Be willing to change practices. These are often the low-hanging fruit. And if you have questions, seek help by contacting Dr. Kendrick or myself. And you can go to the next slide, which is simply just a thank you slide.